Welcome to JWL Sports, where we review all the best sports takes from around the country. Right now, we're with First Things First, discussing if Tua can steal the MVP from Lamar Jackson. That would be mind-blowing if that happens. So let's just jump right into it right away, because I am fascinated to see what on earth the arguments are going to be here.
Best scoring offense, Ravens 12 wins. Best scoring defense, both teams have MVP candidates. Lamar at number 1, McCaffrey at number 2, Tua and Josh tied at 3, and then there's Brock Purdy.
Still in there, huh?
I mean, I guess so. Here's the tail of the tape between Tua and Lamar. I had Josh throw some green checks on there, so we can see that there's a lot of green checks on Tua's side. And if he won this game, the record would just be green checks for everybody, because they'd both be 12-4. So, Drew, can Tua steal the MVP from Lamar Jackson?
He can, because this is, as I said yesterday, it's a strange year, right? Like, usually at this point in the season, it's down to one guy, maybe two, right?
Definitive favorite.
Yeah, it's like, exactly. Yep. And this year, there aren't, I mean, Lamar right now is a definitive favorite, but we've seen it switch every week. And if he were to have, his argument is wins and the impact he's having on the game and the record of the team. It's not like his stats aren't great. They just aren't. You know, they're not great. There are a lot of quarterbacks with better numbers. Even his running stats as far as touchdowns is not huge. So if they were to lose, say, the next 2 games, and now they've got 5 losses, so the record isn't phenomenal, his numbers aren't phenomenal, that would open it up. Now, for Tua, he would have to be great in these last few games, and great kind of maybe without Tyreek being awesome on the other end, like touchdown passes to a lot of the other players. Because Tua, to me, right now, and we talked about the comparisons of him and Purdy. My biggest problem with Tua, and why I kind of started lowering him in the race early in the season, was his best games have come against bad teams.
Well, and that's what's always going to happen. You almost always feast on the bad teams and play. If you're a good player, you feast on the bad teams and play good and competitive. Very rarely do you play your best games against the best teams, right? The best defenses. Of course, that can happen, and that's what makes someone super elite and super special. But that's, for the most part, not what happened, right? You get your numbers, you get your stats on the lower level teams. You pick them apart, and then if you're considered to be good or elite, really, as long as you just play good and competitive, then there you go. But I will say this, again, and this is like, I'm going to be a broken record here, but you can see how stats can be deceiving. There's no way that you watch this game and think to yourself, or just watch these players, I should say, Lamar and Tua, who's more important for their team's success? Who is more important to their team? Tua or Lamar Jackson? It's a no-brainer. Lamar is clearly more important for the success of the Ravens. He is clearly more valuable to the Ravens than Tua is to the Dolphins. That's just the way I see it. That is not to say that Tua is not a good quarterback, right? Like, we've already been over this with Brock Purdy. I'm not saying that Tua is not a good quarterback. I think Tua is a good quarterback. I'm genuinely rooting for Tua. I want to see Tua succeed. I want to see Tua be in this league. I don't want to see him get a concussed ever again. I want him to be successful. I think he's an awesome person, and I think he's an awesome person that I want to have, be a face in the NFL, because he is a good person, right? And so I'm genuinely rooting for that person to succeed. But it's not going to get in my way of me just saying, well, I think he's elite and he's amazing and he's the MVP. I think what Miami is doing is good, but they have an incredibly weak schedule. So if if the Dolphins go in and beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, to me, that would be the most fascinating thing ever, honestly. That would be like, wow, wow. Can the Dolphins maintain this? Like, right? It's something about the Dolphins, either history or the way they play, getting in our way of being able to, accurately evaluate them, or their schedule. Because again, this is really similar to what the Eagles did. The Eagles went off and won the Super Bowl with a relatively I don't want to say unknown team, and this is in 2017, but again, their schedule wasn't strong and they were ripping off wins, and it was like, wow, they haven't really beaten anyone. How can they win the Super Bowl? And they had a couple iffy games, and even in the playoffs against the Atlanta Falcons, it was like it came down to the final play, and it was very close. It could have gone either way. And lo and behold, it rolled in the Eagles' favor. Then they ended up winning the Super Bowl, destroying Minnesota, and playing in obviously incredibly high level against the New England Patriots. And Carson Wentz was a highly drafted quarterback, right? He was number 2 overall. And so, but like he wasn't being proven, he wasn't like fresh out the gate elite. Like he had a rough like first year. And I think it was either a second year or third year when they finally went to the Super Bowl. And then of course he got injured and all of that. But he was in the running for MVP. And a lot of people believed that he was going to win the MVP, but he then got injured, and I forget who then ended up taking it. So this could be the Dolphins' story, is where they are significantly better than people realize, that they have been playing a weaker schedule, which is just undeniable, but it doesn't mean that they're not capable of beating the good teams. And just because they don't punch the good teams in the mouth like a Cowboys or whatever, then no. But the problem is they lost to the Eagles, they lost to the Chiefs, right? They lost to these teams. That's where the comparison kind of dies down between the Eagles in 2017, because the Eagles were winning these games and were beating them by a lot, right? They looked great, but people were saying, but they're not playing good teams. But when they did play good teams, they competed, they won, and they obviously, of course, won in the playoffs, won the Super Bowl. So this could be the Dolphins' story to some degree. The big question is against the Ravens now. I think if they just play competitively, and it's within, you watch that game, and I don't even want to go by the score, because sometimes the game's not that competitive, and it's clearly one team is better than the other, but the score is still close, but you don't really believe that the other team can win. I think if the Dolphins play against the Ravens, and you feel that the Ravens can legitimately, or that the Dolphins can legitimately beat the Ravens, because right now the Ravens are the belle of the ball, you're going to be like, okay, maybe the Dolphins can, because again, maybe they do get that fumble, they do get that interception, or Tua does, throw for 4 touchdowns or whatever in the playoffs, and then they can knock out, the Ravens or the Chiefs or whoever they need to. I think that's a possibility. It's just right now, Tua, I don't know. I don't know if it's because he's a lefty, honestly, or what, but you're watching it and it just doesn't, you just don't have the sense, all right, we got Tua, anything can happen. Right, you think we got to it, anything can happen, but not in the good. Anything can happen. It's like, anything can happen. I don't know what to expect. So, I guess and the more I think about it, Tua can to this MVP if it's a similar situation of, what happened with Lamar versus Purdy. Right, if Lamar only throws for 1 touchdown and has a fumble and an interception or something where he just doesn't play that great, and Tua throws for 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and plays a good, clean game, then yeah, I think then he's probably maybe the leader for the MVP, which is honestly kind of crazy depending on what maybe Josh Allen does. But I think if both players play pretty well, or if Miami wins but Lamar balls out, I think that'll make the odds closer, but I still think Lamar kind of wins out. But I think we'll still be favored. But I think this is more for Lamar to lose than Tua to steal, which there is a difference.
I mean, he hasn't had a 3-touchdown game as far as passing in the last 7 games. All right, so there's that. But then Denver, he threw 4 touchdowns when they were a mess defensively. The Chargers, he had 3 touchdowns against. They're horrible defensively. The Carolina, the worst team in the league, 3 touchdowns. And then New England.
Again, because I know people are going to yell at me, look at this schedule. Look who they beat. They beat the Chargers. Awful. They beat the Patriots. Awful. They beat the Broncos. Awful. They lost to the Bills, who at that point weren't even playing that well. Okay. Then they still lost. They beat the Giants. Awful. They beat the Panthers. Awful. They lost to the Eagles, who also had been a kind of average, team, right? A slightly above average team. They lost to them. They beat the Patriots again, who were awful. Then they lost to Kansas City. Kansas City has proven to not be that great, who just lost to the Raiders, and yet the Dolphins still lost them. They beat the Raiders when the Raiders were spiraling. Okay. They beat the Jets. Awful. They beat the the Commanders, awful. Then they lost to the Tennessee Titans, who are not that good of a team. Then they beat the Jets again, who are awful. And then they beat the Cowboys, who have also proven to be a slightly above average team. So please tell me, where on that schedule are you confident that the Dolphins can just make it happen in the playoffs? Okay, because any of the teams that were actually legitimately competitive and the teams that could actually, really push back against the Dolphins lost. They just did. And they squeaked out that win against the Cowboys. But again, that was more about the Cowboys losing the game than the Dolphins winning the game. If you are looking at that through an unbiased lens and not through a fan's lens, that is exactly what happened. The Cowboys lost that game, or if you want to say the refs, ruined it, which I don't believe, but the Cowboys lost that game. The Dolphins did not win that game. So again, it's not to say that they can't make noise in the playoffs or that they're incapable of beating the Ravens, but you know what? If Miami beats the Ravens, that shows us a lot about Miami and what they're potentially capable of doing. Just if they play them competitively, will kind of tell us more about what the Dolphins can do. But if the Dolphins lose to the Ravens and it's, they lose by 10 and it just was like, it wasn't super competitive, you're like, well, the Dolphins are kind of then who we thought they were. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. What do you guys think? Do you think Tua can actually steal the MVP? Do you think the Dolphins are actually good and it's not fair to judge them based on their schedule, based on who they're playing? Do you think that the Dolphins will actually beat the Ravens? Would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment. So if you think what I'm saying is amazing, let me know. If you think what I'm saying is the dumbest thing ever, also let me know. Either way, let's have some fun. Let's get into some fights and let's just have some discussions. But please, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It really, really helps with the visibility and the algorithm, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. And definitely, please subscribe. We are building an amazing community here, and it's going so well so far, and I would absolutely love to have you part of it. It's all completely free for you, and it means everything to me. Thank you so much, and see you next time.